I have heard countless strange stories throughout my life. Stories about things people cannot explain, encounters that sound impossible, and moments that make you question what is real and what is not. But I never imagined that one day I would become the person telling one of those stories. This happened about a year ago, on a night that started like any other ordinary night. A night that should have been nothing more than another small performance with my band. Instead, it became the night I found myself stranded in the middle of nowhere, completely alone, with no way to escape something I still cannot explain. I am in a band, and anyone who has ever chased music as a dream knows how difficult that life can be. The reality is not glamorous. There are no guaranteed crowds, no easy money, and no promises that the next show will be worth the effort. There were nights when we played in tiny rooms where the sound of our own instruments echoed back at us because there was barely anyone there. Sometimes we performed in places where it felt like the entire building had been abandoned except for us. But when you love music, you take every opportunity you can get. On this particular night, I drove nearly 2 hours away from my home to play a show in a small, isolated town. The other members of the band offered to drive me, but I refused. I told them I would handle it myself because after the show, I needed to drive straight to my other job. The truth was, my life was already a mess financially. My dedication to music meant that normal responsibilities often had to wait. I was constantly choosing between paying bills and putting gas in my car just so I could keep showing up to performances. That night while driving to the show, I noticed something that immediately worried me. My gas tank was dangerously low. I told myself I would deal with it after the performance. I figured I would find a gas station, fill up, and continue home. But by the time I arrived at the venue, the needle was much closer to empty than I wanted to admit. After the show ended, my bandmates left before me. Instead of immediately heading home, I stayed behind for a while. I grabbed a drink at a nearby bar and talked with some of the locals. Eventually, I checked the time. It was almost 2, 0 inches the morning. The town was quiet. The roads were nearly empty. The kind of empty that makes you feel like the entire world has disappeared. I finally got into my car and started driving. A short distance away from the bar was a 2-4-hour gas station, so I pulled in, hoping I could solve my problem. But of course, nothing went smoothly. My card would not work at the pump. I tried again. Nothing. I checked my wallet and realized I only had $5 in cash. I used it and hoped it would be enough to get me home. Deep down, I already knew it probably would not be. I sent a message to my brother asking if he could send me some money through Venmo. I promised I would pay him back, but it was late. Very late. And as expected, there was no response. I got back on the road and tried to convince myself everything would be fine. It was not even close. After driving for a while, the car started slowing down. I watched the fuel gauge drop lower and lower until the engine finally gave up. I was still almost an hour away from home. The car rolled to a stop on the side of a dark, empty road. I sat there in silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy. I looked around and saw nothing. No houses, no lights, no passing cars, just darkness stretching in every direction. My phone barely had any service. I knew if I got out and walked around, maybe I could find a signal, but the thought of standing outside alone in the middle of nowhere at 2-0 inches the morning did not feel right. I considered closing my eyes and waiting until sunrise, maybe sleeping for a few hours, maybe calling someone when the world woke up. But even that felt dangerous. I did not know if sleeping in my car on the side of the road could get me into trouble. So I stayed there, waiting, trying to distract myself. I opened YouTube on my phone, but the videos refused to load because the signal was too weak. I felt completely powerless. And honestly, that moment forced me to think about my life. Sitting there alone in the darkness, I realized how unprepared I was, how many things I had ignored, how badly I needed to get myself together. I had been sitting in that car for about 30 minutes when something caught my attention. Something moved in the corner of my eye. I turned toward the passenger side window, and that was when I saw her. A person standing about 30 or 40 feet away from my car. A figure wearing a hood. Completely still. Not walking. Not waving. Not doing anything. Just standing there. At first, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe someone was lost. Maybe someone needed help. But there was something about the way she appeared out of nowhere that made every instinct in my body scream that something was wrong. Because think about it. You are alone on a deserted road in the middle of the night, and suddenly there's a hooded person standing nearby. Anyone would feel uneasy. I immediately locked my doors. I kept my eyes fixed on her. Every few seconds I looked around the car, checking the mirrors and scanning the darkness. No other people. No vehicles. No movement. Just her. When I looked back, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. She was moving toward my car. Slowly. Painfully slowly. not like someone walking normally, almost like she was taking her time, like she knew I had nowhere to go. I have never felt so trapped in my life. I was inside a car, but my car was useless. The engine would not start. I could not drive away. I was completely stuck. The woman continued approaching until she was only a few feet away from my passenger door. The dim light revealed more details. She looked young, maybe in her 20s, a blonde woman wearing a hood. She looked completely ordinary, and somehow that made it even worse, because she did not look like someone dangerous. She looked like someone who could be anyone. I rolled my window up completely and shouted, "Do you need help? Are you okay?" Nothing. No answer. Not even a reaction. She just stood there, watching. Every minute or so I tried again. I offered help. I asked what she wanted. Still nothing. Eventually I tried to ignore her. I started quietly singing songs to myself. I even started thinking about guitar chords, trying to focus my mind on anything except the terrifying situation happening outside my window. But ignoring her was impossible. That feeling of being watched was unbearable. After trying to communicate with her more than 10 times, I made a decision. I was going to record her. Maybe having evidence would help explain what was happening. I grabbed my phone, opened the camera, and pointed it toward the window. The moment I started recording, everything changed. The woman suddenly moved closer. Fast. She began hitting the passenger door. Hard. Then she grabbed the handle and tried to open it. The sound terrified me. It was not just knocking. It sounded desperate, almost animalistic, like a growl mixed with a scream. The fear that hit me in that moment was overwhelming. I dropped my phone. For a second, I could barely think. I looked at her again, and the strangest part was this. She still looked normal, just a young woman with blonde hair. No obvious signs that anything was wrong, but something about her behavior was completely unnatural. I knew I could not stay there. I grabbed my phone from the floor, took my keys, grabbed my guitar from the back seat, and prepared myself. I took one deep breath, unlocked the door, and ran. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me down that empty road. After a few moments, I looked back, and she was not chasing me. I slowed down. I turned around. She was walking toward me, slowly, but she was not running. She was not trying to catch me. She was simply following the same direction. That was enough for me. I turned around and ran again. When I had driven to the show earlier that night, I remembered passing through a small town before reaching all that empty land. My plan was simple. Run toward the town. Survive until sunrise. Then get help. Looking back, I know I probably should have called the police, but in that moment my mind did not process it as a police situation. It felt strange, confusing, like something I needed to handle myself. At around 6:0 inches the morning I finally reached the edge of the small town, I immediately called my brother. I told him everything. He came to get me, and together we went back to my car. But when we arrived, something immediately caught our attention. The back door of my car was wide open. My heart dropped. We slowly approached. We looked inside. Nobody was there. Nothing was stolen. My music equipment was untouched. Everything was exactly where I left it. The only thing that had changed was the back door. It was open. To this day, I still do not know what happened that night. I do not know who that woman was. I do not know why she appeared out of nowhere. I do not know why she tried to open my car door, and I especially do not know why after everything she did, the only thing she left behind was an open back door. Maybe there is a logical explanation. Maybe there is something I missed. But every time I think back to that night, I remember the same feeling. The feeling of sitting alone in the darkness. The feeling of being watched. And the terrifying realization that sometimes the scariest moments in life are not the things we see clearly. They are the things we never understand. My brother tried to make light of the situation afterward. He laughed and joked that maybe the woman was simply exhausted and looking for somewhere warm to sleep for the night. Maybe she was just desperate. Maybe she was just lost. Maybe she was harmless. But my mind could not accept that simple explanation, because there was one thought that kept returning over and over again. What if she had gotten into the back seat? What if she was hiding there waiting for me to come back to the car? Waiting for me to open the door without knowing she was already inside? That thought still bothers me more than anything else. The fact that I may have been sitting only a few feet away from someone I did not understand, someone whose intentions I could never figure out. I never saw that woman again. I never learned her name. I never discovered why she was there that night or what she actually wanted. And honestly, I think that uncertainty is what makes the memory so disturbing. There is no final answer. No explanation that completely fits. I have heard countless theories about that woman. Some people believe she was simply a homeless traveler wandering through the area. Others think she may have been mentally unwell and looking for help. Some people have even suggested much darker possibilities. The strange thing is that every theory seems possible. But after everything, I think the most likely explanation is that she was just a woman who happened to be walking through a remote area at the exact moment I became stranded there. A terrible coincidence. A terrifying coincidence. I still try not to imagine what could have happened if she had managed to get inside the car, if she had broken a window, if she had forced her way in while I was trapped and unable to escape. That thought is something I refuse to spend too much time thinking about. But that night did change me. I learned a lesson that I will never forget. I always make sure my car has enough gas now. I check before every long trip. I never want to experience that feeling again. That feeling of being completely helpless, alone, trapped, with nowhere to go. Even years later, that night still affects me. And strangely enough, it was not the only terrifying experience that changed the way I see isolated places. Another incident happened when my future wife Jackie and I went hiking. We were not extreme hikers. We were not the kind of people climbing impossible mountains or risking our lives for a challenge. But we did enjoy pushing ourselves. We loved exploring trails, camping in the wilderness, and spending time away from the noise of everyday life. For us, being alone in the woods at night was not frightening. It was peaceful. The sound of wind moving through the trees, the distant calls of animals, the feeling of being completely disconnected from the world. There was something healing about it. Whenever life became overwhelming, we would disappear into the wilderness for a while. The stress of work, responsibilities, and everyday problems seemed to disappear the moment we entered the forest. At least that was how it used to feel. Because after what happened that day, the woods would never feel the same again. The hike began normally. We planned our route carefully. We decided where we wanted to camp. We marked areas that could be dangerous. Jackie was always better at planning those things than I was. She paid attention to details I often ignored. A few hours into the hike, everything changed. We were walking along the trail when suddenly Jackie stopped. She raised her hand, telling me to be quiet. Then she looked at me and asked a question I still remember. "Did you hear that?" At first I heard nothing. I thought maybe she had heard an animal moving through the trees. But Jackie shook her head. She said it sounded different. Not like an animal. Not like the forest. Then a few seconds later, I heard it too. A sound coming from somewhere deep in the woods. A scream. A human scream. At first it was faint, almost impossible to locate, but there was no mistaking it. Someone was crying out. Someone was calling for help. We started moving toward the sound. At first we thought we were getting closer, but the deeper we went, the stranger everything became. The screams are something I still struggle to describe. Even writing about them now brings back the same feeling. It was not like the exaggerated screams you hear in horror movies. It was real, raw, painful. There was desperation in every single sound. This was not someone shouting for attention. This was someone begging to survive. Someone who sounded terrified. Someone who sounded like they were running out of time. Jackie immediately tried to get a phone signal so she could contact authorities. But we were deep in the woods. The service was almost non-existent. Every scream made my entire body tense. I could feel the fear in my chest. I started yelling back. I shouted, asking where they were. I told them we were coming. I begged them to give us any clue about their location. But the strangest part was their response. They never acknowledged us. They continued screaming the same thing. Help. Over and over. Like they could not hear us. Like they were trapped somewhere we could not reach. It felt like we were walking in circles. No matter which direction we moved, the voice seemed to stay the same distance away. Eventually, I told Jackie to leave the forest. I told her to get out and find help. I would keep searching. The screams continued, minute after minute, and somehow, I never became used to them. Every single cry felt just as horrifying as the first. Then, without warning, the screaming stopped. Completely. The silence that followed was worse than the screams themselves. I immediately started yelling. I screamed into the darkness. I called out, asking if they were still there, if they could hear me, if they were alive. But nothing answered. Only my own voice echoed back through the trees. I continued searching. I refused to leave without finding something. Anything. And eventually I found something. A backpack. It was hanging partially from a tree branch, almost like it had been thrown there or caught while someone was moving through the area. I do not know for certain if it belonged to the person screaming, but I knew I had to be close. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was almost nothing. A phone charger, a cheap pocket knife, and a simple thank you card. Nothing special, except for the handwriting. The card was signed, "Love, Mom." Those two words stayed with me. because suddenly this was no longer just a strange situation. There was a real person connected to that bag. Someone's child. Someone's family member. Someone who had someone waiting for them. I looked around the area. I searched for footprints. Signs of a struggle. Anything that could explain what happened. But there was nothing. No person. No evidence. No clue. It was as if the backpack had simply appeared there. As if it had fallen from nowhere. I kept calling out. But the forest remained silent. Eventually, Jackie returned with law enforcement. We explained everything. They took the situation seriously. They searched the area and looked into what happened. But that night we left the forest. We went home. Neither of us wanted to continue the hike. We were shaken. But the worst part was what came afterward. Nothing happened. No missing person was found. No one was identified. There were no reports that matched the situation. Authorities even attempted to compare the handwriting on the card with known missing persons cases in the area. Nothing matched. No answers. No explanation. Just another mystery left behind in the woods. Years have passed, but I still think about those screams. They are some of the most terrifying sounds I have ever heard. Not because they sounded supernatural, but because they sounded human. Someone was suffering. Someone needed help. And I still do not know whether that person was ever found. We barely hike anymore. The forest that once gave us peace now carries a different feeling. Because every time I hear the wind moving through trees or the distant sound of something calling in the darkness, I remember that day. I remember the desperation in those screams. The feeling that someone was out there, close enough to hear, but somehow impossible to reach. I only hope that one day the truth comes out. I hope whoever was calling for help that day eventually found the rescue they were desperately searching for. Years before that happened, right after I graduated high school, I had another experience that changed the way I think about unexplained places. At the time, my girlfriend Tanya and I spent the entire summer taking road trips before we both left for college. We knew that chapter of our lives was ending. We wanted to make every moment count. We visited the usual tourist attractions, but after a while, normal sightseeing became boring. We wanted something different, something memorable. Since we were both huge horror fans, Tanya started searching for places rumored to be haunted. We looked into abandoned locations, supposedly cursed places, and areas with dark histories. We visited several of them. We never saw a ghost. We never experienced anything obviously paranormal. But there was always something strange about those locations. Something about standing in a place surrounded by stories of tragedy and mystery changes the way you feel. Maybe it is psychological. Maybe it is our imagination. But sometimes certain places just feel different. We visited so many locations that summer I lost count. And out of every haunted place we explored, the thing that scared us the most was not even on our list. We did not see a ghost. We did not encounter anything that could clearly be called supernatural. But we did witness something that to this day we still cannot explain. We were nearing the end of our road trip. Looking back, it was one of the best summers of my life. Tanya and I had spent weeks chasing stories, exploring strange places, and visiting locations that people claimed were haunted. We walked through abandoned buildings, old landmarks, and forgotten places with dark histories. But despite all the rumors and all the creepy locations we visited, nothing truly paranormal ever happened. No ghosts. No strange voices. No unexplained encounters. And honestly, we were completely fine with that. The adventure itself was enough. We were young, carefree, and convinced that nothing could really scare us. But on the drive home, that confidence was about to disappear. While making our way back, we passed through a small town somewhere in New England. I know it sounds like something from a horror movie, but the town looked exactly like the kind of place you see in old stories. It had that classic, small town feeling. Old buildings, quiet streets, a sense that time had moved on, but the town had somehow stayed behind. The place looked worn down. Many of the buildings appeared abandoned or barely maintained. Parts of the town looked like they were slowly falling apart. Yet somehow there was still something strangely beautiful about it. A forgotten kind of beauty. The type of place where you could imagine hundreds of stories hidden behind every old door and every cracked window. As we drove through town, something caught our attention. An old abandoned church. Next to the church was what appeared to be an old-school building. The entire place looked familiar. Almost too familiar. The architecture reminded us of the Catholic elementary school we had both attended back home. The same kind of layout. The same old-fashioned design. The same feeling of a place that had once been filled with children, laughter, and life. At first I was just joking around. I looked at Tanya and said something like, "We should break in and see if it looks like our old school inside." I expected her to laugh. I expected her to tell me that was a ridiculous idea. Instead, she looked at me completely seriously. She told me to pull over. She wanted to go inside. Looking back now as an adult, I cannot believe we even considered doing something like that. I would never walk into an abandoned building illegally today. But when I was 18 years old, I felt invincible. I was young. I was excited. I was caught up in the adventure. At that age, consequences felt like something that happened to other people. So I parked the car behind the school where the trees and overgrown vegetation would keep us hidden. The sun was already gone. Darkness had completely taken over. We walked around the building testing different doors, one after another. Locked, locked, locked. For a moment I thought Tanya was finally going to give up, but she did not. She was determined. We continued searching until we reached a side entrance near what appeared to be the gymnasium. I grabbed the handle. The door moved. It opened. We froze. We could not believe it. After everything being locked, we had somehow found the one door that was left open. Instead of thinking about how strange that was, we walked right in, like we belonged there. The moment we stepped inside, the feeling changed. Outside, it was just an old abandoned building. Inside, it felt different. The gymnasium was enormous compared to what we expected. Moonlight poured through the dirty windows, creating long shadows across the floor. Dust floated through the air, visible in the pale beams of light. It looked like the entire building had been frozen in time, like everyone had simply walked away one day and never returned. The smell was one of the first things I noticed. It was awful. The air was thick with the scent of decay, old wood, and years of neglect. It smelled like every forgotten creature in the area had found its way inside that building. We wanted to take pictures. We wanted proof that we had explored this abandoned school, but both of us had left our phones in the car, and strangely enough, neither of us cared enough to go back. We were caught up in the moment. We were exploring. We were living the experience. At the far end of the gym was a doorway leading into the main part of the school. Beyond it was a long brick hallway. The second I saw it, I remember thinking it looked less like a school and more like an abandoned prison. The hallway was dark, almost completely dark. The only light came from small openings where moonlight slipped through broken windows. It was barely enough to see a few feet ahead. We walked through the school slowly. There was something fascinating about the place. It did not feel like a building that had been destroyed. It felt like a building that had simply been forgotten. Desks were still there. Old classroom materials remained scattered around. In one room, we found textbooks sitting open on desks. It looked like someone had been interrupted in the middle of a lesson and never came back. I still regret not taking one of those books. It would have been an incredible reminder of that night. One of the strangest details about the school was the layout. From inside, the building was shaped almost like a cross. The gymnasium formed the bottom section. A long hallway extended forward. Then it split left and right, creating the shape of a cross throughout the building. At the time, we thought it was interesting. Nothing more. But later I would think about that layout again, because that hallway became the place where everything changed. After spending some time exploring, we were standing in one of the classrooms at the end of the left hallway. We were talking quietly, just enjoying the atmosphere. Then suddenly, a sound came from the hallway, a loud crashing noise. Something had fallen, or something had been hit. Both of us stopped talking. I immediately turned toward the door. For a moment I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe an animal, maybe a rat, maybe something loose inside the old building. I stepped into the hallway, but honestly, looking out there was almost pointless. The darkness was overwhelming. The faint moonlight barely revealed anything. The hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel. A few shadows moved with the shifting light, but nothing was clear. Tanya whispered and asked, "Do you know what that was?" I told her it was probably just a rodent, but before I could finish my sentence, I stopped, because I saw something. At the very end of the hallway, something moved. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The darkness can do strange things to your imagination, especially in an abandoned building, especially at night. I was about to tell Tanya that I was probably just seeing things. Then it happened again. This time there was no denying it. Something rose from the darkness.
A figure.
A shape. Something tall enough to block the faint light coming from one of the open classroom doors at the far end of the hall. It was not a shadow moving. It was something standing there. Something real. My entire body reacted before my mind could process it. I rushed back into the classroom. I grabbed the door and closed it as quietly as possible. My heart was pounding. I barely whispered, "I think someone is inside the school." Tanya looked confused. She reminded me that we had walked through almost the entire building. We had checked every room, every hallway. There was no way someone else was inside. She told me it was probably my imagination, and maybe she was right. Maybe my brain had created something out of the darkness. Maybe the fear and atmosphere had gotten to me. But deep down I knew what I saw. because whatever emerged from those shadows did not feel imaginary. It felt like something had been standing there, watching us, waiting for us to notice. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. We just sat there in silence, trying to convince ourselves that what had happened was not real. Maybe it was all in our heads. Maybe after spending days exploring abandoned buildings and supposedly haunted locations, our minds had finally started playing tricks on us. Fear is a strange thing. Sometimes when you expect something terrifying to happen, your brain starts creating things that are not there. That was the explanation I wanted to believe. But then, just before we were about to leave the classroom, we heard something again. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps coming from the hallway outside. They were moving toward us. Every sound echoed through that abandoned school. Step, step, step. The two of us instantly froze. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us even wanted to breathe too loudly. We stood there completely still, listening as the footsteps got closer and closer. The sound was coming directly toward the classroom. For a moment, it felt like whoever or whatever was outside knew exactly where we were. The footsteps reached the area outside the door, and then they stopped. Right outside our classroom. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would give us away. I looked at Tanya. She looked back at me. We did not need to say anything. We both knew. It was time to leave. I slowly moved toward the classroom door. Every movement felt painfully slow. I carefully pushed it open and looked into the hallway. Nothing. No person. No movement. Just darkness. The hallway was empty. For a brief moment, relief washed over me. I tried to explain it away. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe old pipes. Maybe something falling inside the building. Even though deep down I knew those footsteps did not sound like anything except a person walking. We grabbed each other's hands and ran. Our only goal was to get back to the gym and out of the building. We sprinted down the hallway as quietly as we could. But just before we reached the turn that led toward the gym, everything changed. The footsteps came back, only this time they were different, much different. The sound behind us was no longer slow. It was no longer cautious. Something was chasing us. The footsteps were heavy, powerful, loud enough that the entire hallway seemed to shake. It sounded like something massive was running after us. Not a person walking, not a small animal, something much heavier, something that was closing the distance between us. Neither of us looked back. We were too afraid of what we might see. We ran faster than we had ever run before. The gym entrance was ahead. We rushed inside. Then finally we stopped. We turned around. Nothing. The hallway behind us was empty, completely empty. No person, no creature, nothing. But we had heard it. We both heard something chasing us. Something big. Something close. And now it was gone. There was no explanation. No logical answer. And honestly, we did not want to stay long enough to find one. We immediately ran toward the gym door where we had entered. That was when we encountered our next problem. The door would not open. At first I thought it was just stuck. Maybe the old wood had swollen. Maybe the lock was damaged. So I pulled harder. Then harder. Nothing. The door would not move. I looked at Tanya. We both realized the same thing. This was the exact same door we had walked through earlier. The same door that had been unlocked. The same door we entered without any effort. And now it was locked. That made no sense. None of it made sense. But one thing gave us some comfort. Whatever had been chasing us was gone, at least for the moment. So instead of panicking, we tried to think clearly. We were trapped inside an old abandoned school, but it was not a prison. It was not some impossible fortress. There had to be another way out. Even if every door was locked, we could break a window. We could climb out. We had options. We tried the gym door several more times. Nothing. Finally, we decided there was no point wasting time. We would run to the nearest classroom, break a window, and escape. We took off. We crossed the gym. We entered the hallway. We had only gone about 30 feet toward the first classroom on the left when we heard it again. The footsteps. The same sound. The same presence. Whatever had followed us before was back. I tried looking behind me, but I saw nothing. Only darkness. Only empty hallway. But I could hear it. It was there. Then suddenly, the footsteps stopped. Again, just like before. I looked through the small window on the classroom door. At first I saw nothing. Then I noticed something. A shadow. A large shadow stretching across the wall on the opposite side of the hallway. It was not a normal shadow. It seemed to move, almost like it was slowly swaying back and forth. But it was not moving toward us. It was not attacking. It was just there, watching. I did not know what I was looking at, and honestly, I did not want to know. Tanya tried opening the classroom window. It would not move. She pulled. She pushed. Nothing. So she grabbed one of the old classroom chairs. Without hesitation, she smashed it into the glass. The sound was deafening. The window exploded. Glass shattered everywhere. And the moment that happened, the shadow disappeared. It faded back into the darkness, like it had never been there. I did not turn around to look where it went. I did not care anymore. All I cared about was escaping. We carefully climbed through the broken window, making sure not to cut ourselves. The moment our feet touched the outside ground, we started moving. We were almost on the opposite side of the building from where we had parked. We quietly ran back toward the car. This time we heard nothing. No footsteps. No movement. No voices. Nothing followed us. As we passed the gym entrance, something made me stop. I do not know why. Maybe curiosity. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that there was a normal explanation. I walked over and tried the door from the outside. The same door we had entered through earlier. The same door that had been unlocked. I grabbed the handle, and my stomach dropped. It was locked. Completely locked. I stood there for a moment, unable to understand what I was seeing. Then I got back to the car. We drove away. We never reported what happened. The truth was, we knew how it would look. If anyone got in trouble, it would probably be us. We had entered an abandoned building illegally. We were about to start college. We did not want to deal with consequences from something that already felt impossible to explain. Tanya and I stopped dating once college began, but we remained friends. Even today, whenever we see each other, that trip eventually comes up. We still tell the story. We still try to figure out what happened. Maybe there is a completely rational explanation. Maybe someone was secretly living inside that old school. Maybe there was some simple answer we never discovered. But the problem is, that explanation does not answer everything. It does not explain the footsteps. It does not explain the figure in the hallway. It does not explain the shadow. And it certainly does not explain how a door that was unlocked when we entered somehow became locked from the inside. Some people might think the story sounds exaggerated. They are allowed to believe that. But Tanya and I know what we experienced. We know what we heard. We know what we saw. And I know I will never forget the feeling of standing inside that abandoned school, realizing we might not be alone. Years later, I still think about that night. Because sometimes the scariest places are not the ones with ghosts or legends. Sometimes the scariest places are ordinary places where something happens that you simply cannot explain. And once you experience something like that, a part of you never stops wondering what was really there. I have always been someone who hated the outdoors. Camping, hiking, sleeping in the middle of nowhere. Pretty much anything involving nature was never my idea of a good time. So naturally, when my old friends planned a reunion camping trip in the woods, everyone was excited. Everyone except me. I voted against it. Strongly. But unfortunately, I was outnumbered. I could have refused to go. But I now lived across the country, and I rarely got the chance to see my old friends anymore. So I made a decision. I would put aside my hatred for the outdoors. I would deal with a few uncomfortable nights in the woods. Because spending time with people I cared about was worth it. At least, that was what I thought before the trip began. The first morning in the woods started like any other camping trip. At least that was what I wanted to believe. The sun was shining, everyone was in a good mood, and for a brief moment I thought maybe I had been worrying for nothing. Maybe spending a few days surrounded by nature would not be as terrible as I imagined. I was wrong. Because the biggest danger on that trip was not the wilderness. It was my friends. Especially Derek. Now I say that with love because Derek has always been one of my closest friends. But everyone who knows him understands one thing. He has a talent for taking things just a little too far. He is the kind of person who sees a warning sign and thinks it looks like an invitation. He loves adventure. He loves exploring places people are not supposed to explore. And somehow I convinced myself that this camping trip would be different. That maybe for once Derek would act responsibly. I was completely wrong. Not long after we started hiking, we slowly began drifting away from the marked trail. I protested. A lot. But nobody listened. According to Derek and a few of my other friends, this was actually normal. They claim that many people leave the main trails because these woods are massive and filled with hidden caves scattered throughout the area. They wanted to find one. To them, it was exciting. An adventure. Something we would laugh about later. To me, it sounded like the beginning of a terrible decision, and my concerns only got worse when we were already deep off the trail. That was when Derek casually mentioned something important. Something he probably should have told me before we wandered into the middle of nowhere. A lot of the land in this area was private property. I stopped walking. I looked at him. I honestly could not believe what I was hearing. I immediately imagined the worst possible scenario. Some angry landowner appearing out of nowhere. Someone thinking we were trespassing. Someone with a weapon who did not appreciate strangers walking through their property. I was furious. My friends laughed. They told me to calm down. They explained that private property in this area did not mean someone's backyard. It was not like we were walking through someone's garden. These were huge sections of wilderness, hundreds of acres, large areas of forest that belonged to private owners but were still surrounded by endless trees and empty land. Their explanation helped me relax slightly, but I was still annoyed, mostly because I could not believe they had waited until we were already deep in the woods to mention it. We continued walking for what felt like hours. The deeper we went, the less enjoyable it became. The forest became thicker. Branches grabbed at our clothes. Bushes scratched our arms. Every direction looked exactly the same. Trees, leaves, darkness between the branches. Derek kept saying he knew exactly where he was going, but honestly I was starting to question that. Eventually we reached something that immediately made everyone stop. A massive drop-off. A steep bluff cutting through the forest. It was not a cliff where one wrong step meant certain death, but it was still a terrifying drop. The kind of place where falling would leave you seriously injured. Naturally, Derek decided that was the perfect moment to joke. He laughed and said we should probably be careful not to fall. I did not find it funny, but I also knew I had been complaining the entire hike. I did not want to become the person ruining everyone's fun, so I stayed quiet. We continued walking along the edge because according to Derek, this was exactly the kind of area where caves were usually hidden. I was toward the back of the group. Everyone else was ahead of me. Then it happened. One single step, one small mistake. My foot caught on a tree root. Before I could regain my balance, the ground disappeared beneath me, and I fell. The next few seconds are something I will never forget. I started rolling down the steep slope. I was completely out of control. I remember grabbing at the dirt, trying to find something, anything. A root, a branch, a rock. But everything slipped away. I was just tumbling, rolling, falling. I was shouting, but my own voice sounded distant. Above me, I could hear my friends screaming my name. I could hear panic in their voices, but I could not stop. The trees blurred together. The ground hit me again and again. I honestly thought I was about to seriously hurt myself. Then suddenly, I stopped. For a few seconds, I just lay there, trying to understand what had happened, trying to breathe. Slowly, I forced myself to stand, and that was when I realized how far I had fallen. I looked upward. Through the trees, I could barely see my friends. They were standing at the top of the bluff. From where I was, they looked tiny, like distant figures in another world. I tried climbing back up. Immediately, I realized it was impossible. Every time I grabbed onto something, it broke loose. Every step upward sent me sliding back down. There was nothing stable, no easy way back. I could barely hear Derek shouting from above. The distance made his voice unclear. I thought I heard him say something like, "Go back." I was not completely sure, but I saw him pointing. His hand was motioning toward a different direction. At the time, I assumed he was showing me a safer route. Maybe there was a ledge. Maybe there was a path around the bluff. Looking back, I should have stayed exactly where I was. I should have waited. My friends could have found help. A ranger could have reached me. But I made the mistake of trusting that Derek knew what he was doing. I started walking in the direction he pointed. At first, I thought I was making progress. Then, a few minutes later, I turned around, and my heart dropped. I could not see my friends anymore. They were gone. The forest had swallowed them completely. That was the moment panic truly set in. I was alone. Completely alone. And the worst part was that I did not realize I was making the situation worse. I just kept walking. One direction, then another, trying to find my way back. What I discovered later was terrifying. I was not heading toward where we came from. I was walking in the exact opposite direction. I was getting farther away. I was lost. I started shouting, "Help!" over and over. My voice disappeared into the trees. No response. No movement. Nothing. That was when a different fear entered my mind. Animals. I had no idea what lived in those woods. I did not know what was watching me. I started imagining something following me between the trees. Something waiting for the right moment. Every few seconds I would turn around. I would scan the forest. But every time, nothing. Just endless trees. Endless silence. Hours passed. Eventually the initial panic faded. Not because I felt safe. Because my body had entered survival mode. Fear was still there. But adrenaline had taken over. I was tired. Hungry. Scared. But I kept moving. Then suddenly I felt something I had not felt in hours. Hope. I came across a rocky formation. It looked like a possible way back upward. Maybe it would lead me closer to where I started. Maybe I could finally escape this nightmare. The rocks were not exactly a climbing wall. They were more like giant natural steps. I carefully started making my way upward. Grab a rock. Pull myself higher. Step. Repeat. For the first time since falling, I felt like I might actually make it. I thought the worst was behind me. I was wrong. Because just when I believed I had finally found a way out, one of the rocks moved. The piece I grabbed onto suddenly cracked. It broke loose beneath my hand. My body shifted, and in an instant I became trapped between two massive rocks, unable to move, unable to climb, unable to free myself. I was completely stuck, alone in the middle of the wilderness, with no idea where I was, no way back, and no idea if anyone would find me before it was too late. At that moment, one terrifying thought kept repeating in my mind. The story of 127 hours. If you know the story, you know exactly what I was thinking. A person trapped alone in the wilderness. No help. No way out. Time slowly running out. And the worst part was that I was beginning to understand that feeling. I was trapped between two massive rocks, completely alone, with the sun slowly disappearing behind the trees. I pulled. I pushed. I twisted my body in every possible direction. Nothing worked. Every movement only made the pain worse. The rocks had me completely pinned. For the first time during the entire ordeal, I truly started believing that I might not get out. Eventually, desperation took over. I started screaming, not calling out casually, not yelling for attention. I was screaming because I was afraid. Afraid that nobody would find me. Afraid that I would spend the night trapped there. Afraid that this was how my story ended. The forest was getting darker by the minute. The normal trail was far away. My friends were nowhere in sight, and I was stuck in a place where almost nobody would ever think to look. Then, while I was trapped there, something happened that made my blood run cold. I heard it again. The same sound I had noticed earlier. The sound I thought was an animal following me. A movement in the trees. A presence nearby. My imagination immediately went to the darkest possible place. I pictured some wild animal watching me. Waiting until I was too weak to defend myself. I thought whatever had been stalking me was finally coming out. I prepared myself for the worst. But what stepped out from the tree line was not an animal. It was a person. A man. He slowly emerged from the woods. He looked to be middle-aged. He was extremely thin, almost unnaturally thin. He had a mustache, glasses, and was wearing a red flannel shirt. The strange thing was his behavior. He did not rush toward me. He did not look surprised. He did not seem concerned that he had found someone injured and trapped in the wilderness. He simply walked toward me, slowly, calmly, almost like he already knew exactly where I was. I immediately started begging him for help. I told him everything. I explained that I had gotten separated from my friends. I told him I had fallen. I told him I was trapped and needed help, but he barely reacted. He did not answer my questions. He did not ask if I was hurt. He just stared at the rocks around me, studying the situation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. But the first thing he said was not what I expected. He ignored everything I had just told him. Instead, he asked, "Do you know you're on private property?" That question completely caught me off guard. Here I was injured and trapped, expecting someone to help me. And his first concern was whether I knew where I was standing. I immediately switched into survival mode. I played dumb. I told him I had no idea. I explained that I was lost and had no intention of being there. The man did not argue. He did not say anything else. He simply reached down. Somehow, with almost no effort, he moved part of the rock that had trapped me. I still do not understand how he did it. A few moments later, I was able to pull myself free. I was exhausted, painfully bruised, completely overwhelmed with relief. I thanked him. I thanked him again, but he ignored me. He simply turned around and started walking away. Before I could ask where he was going, he stopped and said something that immediately confused me. He told me to follow him. He said my friends were waiting for me at his house. I froze. My friends. At his house. That did not make sense. I tried asking questions. How did he know my friends? How did they get there? Why were they at his house? But he did not explain. He just kept walking. My friends are waiting for me. I repeated. He did not answer. He only told me again to follow him. Looking back, I still cannot believe I went with him. But at that moment, I was physically and mentally destroyed. I had been lost for hours. I was injured. I was exhausted. My judgment was not exactly at its best, so I followed. And the farther we walked, the stranger everything became, because something felt wrong. The direction we were heading did not seem like the way back. It felt like we were going deeper into the woods, further away from civilization, further away from where my friends should have been. The sun was almost completely gone. Darkness was spreading between the trees. I kept trying to talk to him. I asked questions. I tried to get more information, but he remained mostly silent. Every once in a while he would mumble something under his breath, but nothing clear enough for me to understand. Eventually, after what felt like forever, we reached something hidden deep in the forest. A structure. At first I thought it was a shed, but it was too large for that. It was smaller than a house, but much bigger than a normal shed. A strange building sitting alone in the middle of nowhere. The man walked up to the door. Then he turned toward me. He told me to go inside. He said my friends were waiting. At that moment, every instinct I had started screaming. Something was wrong, very wrong, because I knew my friends, especially Derek. There was no chance they would have gone inside some random stranger's hidden forest building and waited there. That did not make sense. None of this made sense. I looked at the door. I looked at the dark woods surrounding us. And suddenly I realized something. I did not know where I was. I did not know who this man really was. And I was about to enter a place completely isolated from everyone else. I told him to open the door and tell my friends to come outside. He refused. He said I needed to go inside first. He said it was not safe to stay outside. Those words made everything worse, because now I was no longer just confused. I was afraid. Every warning sign in my mind was flashing. I knew I could not go inside, not for 1 second. I thanked him for saving me. I told him I would find my own way back, and before he could respond, I turned around, and I ran, straight into the darkness. I did not have a plan. I did not know where I was going. I only knew one thing. I could not enter that building, not knowing who that man was, not knowing what was waiting inside. I ran deeper into the woods. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Behind me. I stopped. My heart sank, because there was not just one set of footsteps. There were two. Two different people chasing me through the darkness. I ran faster. Branches hit my face. Roots grabbed at my feet. The forest was almost completely black now. I could barely see anything. Eventually, exhaustion took over. I found a large tree and collapsed behind it. I pulled my knees to my chest and sat there in the fetal position, trying not to breathe too loudly, trying not to move, trying not to be found. The footsteps eventually stopped. The forest became silent again, but I did not move. I did not trust the silence, because by that point I had learned something terrifying about those woods. The most frightening moments were not always when something was chasing you. Sometimes the worst moments were when everything suddenly became quiet. I stayed hidden behind that tree for what felt like an eternity. I was completely frozen. Every muscle in my body was tense. Every sound made me think they had found me. I sat there in the darkness, holding my breath, listening for any sign of movement. A branch breaking. Footsteps. Voices. Anything. But nothing came. For hours I remained exactly where I was. I barely moved. I barely breathed. I knew that if those men were still searching for me, making any unnecessary noise could give away my location. So I waited, and waited. The night felt endless. The forest around me was completely different now. Earlier it had been a place filled with trees and nature. Now it felt like a maze. A place that was hiding things from me. A place where I was the outsider. I kept thinking about everything that had happened. The fall, being trapped between the rocks, the strange man appearing out of nowhere, the hidden structure deep in the woods, the way he insisted my friends were inside. Every detail replayed in my mind, and the more I thought about it, the more wrong it felt. Eventually, the darkness began to fade. The first signs of morning appeared through the trees. Light. Real light. For the first time in hours, I felt like I had a chance. I did not wait. The moment I could see clearly enough, I got up and started running. I had no idea exactly where I was. I had no idea if I was going in the right direction. I only knew one thing. I needed to get out of those woods. I ran until my legs burned. I pushed through exhaustion. I ignored every pain in my body. At that point, survival was the only thing controlling me. Looking back, I consider myself unbelievably lucky, because after hours of running through the forest, I finally saw something that almost looked impossible. A road. A real road. It was one of the roads we had driven on earlier to reach the park. I remember standing there for a moment, almost unable to believe what I was seeing. After everything that happened, I had somehow made it out. I stepped onto the road and immediately tried to get someone's attention. A vehicle eventually came by. I waved my arms and flagged them down. The driver stopped and they called the authorities for me. At the same time, my friends had already realized something was seriously wrong. They had been searching for me with a park ranger. When we finally reunited, it was one of the biggest moments of relief I have ever experienced. Seeing familiar faces again felt unreal. I told the park ranger everything. I explained about the man in the woods, the hidden building, the 2 sets of footsteps chasing me, the entire strange encounter. The ranger listened carefully and told me he would look into it. But honestly, I have no idea what happened after that. I never found out if he located the structure. I never learned who that man was. I never got answers. At that point, I did not care. I just wanted to leave. I wanted to get back into my car and drive as far away from those woods as possible. They asked me if I could guide them back to where the shed was, but I could not. I tried explaining that I did not know how. The truth was, I was completely disoriented. I could not even say with confidence whether I had run in a straight line when I escaped. The forest had destroyed any sense of direction I had. Trying to retrace my steps was impossible. Finding that road was not skill. It was not planning. It was pure luck. A miracle. Because if I had gone even slightly in another direction, I might have spent another night lost out there, and I do not know if I would have survived. Before that trip, I already disliked camping. I never understood why people enjoyed sleeping outside, being surrounded by insects, and spending days away from civilization. After everything that happened, my opinion changed permanently. I was done. Completely done. Because you do not understand true fear until you are alone in the wilderness, until you are injured, until darkness is approaching, until you realize there may be nobody coming to save you. The woods are beautiful from a distance. They can feel peaceful. They can feel calming. But when you are lost inside them, when you no longer know where you are, when every sound could mean danger, the forest becomes something completely different. It becomes a place where your imagination fights against reality. And sometimes the things you cannot explain are the things that stay with you forever.